Hello, everybody. Welcome to the May 2026 session of the Richmond Art Gallery's Artist Salon series, featuring our guest artist tonight, Jo Anne Balcaen. My name is Kathy Tycholis. I am the Richmond Art Gallery's Education and Public Programs Coordinator, and I'm here to host and to moderate your questions tonight. First of all, on behalf of the Richmond Art Gallery Association, I would like to welcome you to this program hosted by the Richmond Art Gallery, which is located on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Hunkaminam-speaking peoples, which are the nations that have lived along the Fraser River Delta since time immemorial, including the Musqueam. And I would like to thank you from wherever you are joining us today and zooming in and supporting the Richmond Art Gallery's programs. In a few moments, I will introduce our guest presenter who will lead a presentation about her art practice, followed by some Q&A with all of you. So for those of you who are new to the Artist Salon program, this is a monthly program featuring free talks and workshops specifically for visual artists and creatives hosted from February to November. The goal of the program is to offer artists a mix of professional development tips and advice, along with artists' personal stories and experiences, while encouraging artists to keep on making and growing in your art practice. It does also exist not just as a monthly program, but as a Facebook group. It provides resources for artists all over the Lower Mainland, for exhibition calls, opportunities, professional development opportunities, as well as a space for you to share your work and to share and grow your community locally. So I suggest you check that out. It is the Raga Artist Salon. You can find out more about that on our website, as well as on Facebook if you just look up Raga Artist Salon. So I'm very happy to have with us tonight guest presenter Jo Anne Balcaen. Thank you so much for joining us today live from Winnipeg.
Thank you.
Jo Anne is currently exhibiting at Richmond Art Gallery in the group exhibition I Digress, where she has work on display both inside and outside of the gallery walls. If you are able to see it in person, it is on now until July 5th, 2026. And that was how I was first introduced to Jo Anne through her work. And when I was first sort of preparing for the upcoming show, I laughed a lot when I was viewing her work and really wanted to learn more about her right away. I love art with humor and especially some dark humor thrown in there. So the body of work you will currently see at the Richmond Art Gallery, it reveals sort of the inner thoughts and anxieties that many visual artists have. So I immediately thought she would be an ideal guest for the Artist Salon, where we always want to provide more insight to artists and know that you're not alone out there. So while we share, many similarities as artists and maybe those dark thoughts, I was also curious to hear how the sort of arts ecosystem is different from BC to Manitoba, because there's definitely differences depending where you are in Canada. So we'll be touching on that as well a bit tonight. So I will begin with a brief introduction via a very short bio of Jo Anne, and then I will hand it over to her for her presentation, and then we'll open it up to Q&A with all of you. So Jo Anne Balcaen is originally from Broquerie, Manitoba. She lived and worked in Montreal for 25 years before returning to Winnipeg in 2021. Her work has been presented across Canada, the US, Scotland, and Ireland, and she has received grants from the Manitoba Arts Council, the Conseil des Arts et des Lettres de Québec, and the Canada Council for the Arts, including the Canada Council's International Residency at the International Studio and Curatorial Program in New York. So welcome, Jo Anne. I'm so happy to have you here today. I will disappear into the background for your presentation, and then I'll come back to moderate questions. And again, please feel free to put your questions anytime throughout. So thank you, Jo Anne.
Thanks, Kathy, and thanks very much for inviting me to do this talk. Very happy to be here. So I'm going to be showing work from a while back, but I wanted to start with this video called Mount Rundle, and it's from 2014. I'm just showing a video still. I'm not going to show the video here because apparently there can be issues with the audio not coming through over Zoom when the session is being recorded. So I wanted to avoid that. And I also didn't want to start the talk by showing an almost 4-minute video. So instead, I invite you to just head over to my website later on and listen to it there, but I will talk about it a bit here. So I'm starting with this work because it represents a turning point in my practice when I was starting to think about the hidden facets of an artist's career, like the things you don't really talk about, the unsaid or things that might be shameful, and also what goes into actually making and presenting work, whether that's in the studio or in the gallery, and how these spaces can carry a lot of psychological weight. So you can imagine, if you can imagine, the video is a very slow zoom into the center of this painting that I made when I was 12 years old. And there's a voiceover narrative of me describing the story behind the painting and its connection to an artist residency I had at the Banff Center exactly 20 years later. The narrative is in the second person. So I say, you were 12 years old, sitting at a table with your mother and a few other women from your hometown. And I did this because I wanted to not only put the viewer in my shoes, but also in a way to pass on the burden of vulnerability onto them. So the narrative describes an experience of déjà vu I had at the Banff Center and how I was unexpectedly confronted with the unpredictable nature of the creative process. It is loosely based on fact, and it combines elements or states of mind from two residencies I had there, one in 2003 and one in 2007. So, as with some of my other videos or audio works, I start off with my own lived experience and expand on that to create a narrative. This project is called Inventory, and it's from 2013. So in 2013, I was invited by the Leonard and Bina Ellen Art Gallery at Concordia University to do a project for their off-site exhibition program called Sightings, which presents work outside of the gallery in this big cube in another building on campus. So I took it as an opportunity to think about the years I'd spent working at that gallery, as an exhibition coordinator, which turned out to be a very important period in my career because I learned a ton about the professional side of exhibition presentation. And that experience had a huge impact on the kind of work I make even to this day. So for this project, I wanted to focus on objects from the gallery that I was familiar with and that had some relationship to its exhibition history during my time there. So these are some of the tools and materials that are in the gallery's preparatory room. And I wanted to present a selection of them as if they were art objects in themselves, or at least objects that are worthy of special attention. And I did this by talking about their relationship to some of the artists we'd exhibited. So this shift in context from hidden service room to public display module provided an opportunity to reconsider the use value and aesthetic potential of these objects. So now the usual subordinate role they played in relation to more esteemed artworks was inverted as they became these kind of passive contemplative objects. So to provide context for the viewer, I wrote a text that gave a behind-the-scenes account of 5 objects that were in the cube. So there was a wooden crate, a road case for a television monitor, a can of Roscoe video paint, 3 identical clocks, and a feather duster. And the text that I wrote was written in the kind of combined jargon of museum didactic panels and Lee Valley catalog product descriptions. I have a brief excerpt of it here that I'll read. The Sony PVM 2950Q monitor road case, located in the center of the module, houses one of 12 monitors that were used to present German artist Harun Farokhi's seminal video, Workers Leaving the Factory in 11 Decades, which was on view at the gallery in the fall of 2007. The road case's fiberglass laminate exterior, double-edged aluminum extrusion, 4-inch caster wheels, foam-lined interior, recessed nickel-plated latches, heavy-duty ball corners, and spring-loaded handles make it a stellar example of design efficiency and impeccable craftsmanship. So the text went on and described each of those 4 items in similar kind of detail. This is a piece called List of Job Titles. And with this work, I was thinking about jobs in the museum sector and how status or power is conferred through one's title. I looked at staff listings on museum and gallery websites and collected as many job titles as I could find, but instead of presenting them in the traditional style of an organizational chart where the status of each position in relation to others is obvious, I organized them into 2 columns. So on the left, I imposed a single file forced hierarchy based on my estimate of that position's rank in an institution. And on the right, I listed them in alphabetical order to create an alternative kind of classification. So I made this piece during my artist residency at the ISCP in New York. And we had an open studios event that attracted a lot of art world professionals. So I invited people to correct the rankings by moving the titles around with a red marker and thereby engage in their own game of power dynamics. Also, as part of the same residency, I published a book called Survey for Cultural Workers. And the impetus for that came from my desire to shed light on the work of arts administrators and installation technicians and curators and educators and others who work behind the scenes. I wanted to ask them about their challenges and their motivations and what their work relationships were like. So I sent the survey to artist-run centers and galleries and museums across Canada and the US and invited people to complete the survey online. So the respondents were kept anonymous so they'd feel more comfortable sharing their thoughts. So they're only identified by their city and their job title. Some sample questions are based on your experience or observations. How would you describe the artist-curator relationship? Another question is, in your daily work interactions, which group or category of people do you work hardest to please? Choose one. Artists, curators, directors, funders, the public. I don't work to please anyone. The people I work for are never pleased. This is a series called Internal Dynamics. So for about 12 years, I supported my art practice by working in galleries, and this gave me an intimate knowledge of the labor behind exhibition presentation. And it also completely changed how I visit galleries and look at art. So now I often spend more time looking at the space itself and peeking into the office and examining how the works are installed than actually looking at the art. So I wanted to, in fact, I approach going to galleries with this kind of dual mindset of artist and cultural worker. So for this project, I was interested in the idea of self-actualization within the art world and the symbolic value of sight as it relates to art world success. So in this case, commercial galleries in New York's Chelsea district that represent like the apex of the commercial art world. And of course, this is a part of the art world that's highly mythologized and that operates on an entirely different plane from what the vast majority of artists get to experience professionally. So each image in the series represents the physical and psychic barriers between the gallery's public spaces and areas of privileged access, like office doors or hallways that have a subtle but clear indicator that an area is off limits. Formally, the photographs range from furtive, grainy iPhone snapshots to high-resolution images, and they were all shot surreptitiously. I never asked for permission. So there's certainly an aspect of surveillance or voyeurism that comes through. And what interested me about these thresholds is that they represent a kind of shift between two realities or two intensities. There's the slow, quiet, contemplative public space of the gallery, and the private, administrative, high stakes, transactional space of the office. So I like how these two environments exist side by side. And they're both shrouded in mystery and potential, and yet the artist is totally absent. They just kind of hover over it all like an invisible presence. And the series also includes images of front desks. There's certainly a standard model for these. They're designed to kind of blend into their environment, but also to create an imposing physical barrier between the gallery attendant and the public. So as a result, they seem to send a message that interaction is discouraged because the gallery attendant is usually almost entirely hidden, which makes for some amusing images. This is an installation view of the series when I showed it at Optica in Montreal in 2019. So when I was invited to show this series at Optica, I decided that I wanted to add an audio element that would play over loudspeakers and, in a sense, accompany the viewer through this trajectory of images and provide a framework for it. Since some of the things I was looking for when I shot these images were traces of humanity within these otherwise clean and cold and sterile environments, I wanted the audio narrative to embody an empathetic voice. So I was thinking about self-help books and meditation guides, and I based the narrative on the idea that I was addressing the people who work in these galleries, particularly the support staff, as well as artists in general who might be experiencing pressure or self-doubt about their careers. So I'm going to read a brief excerpt here. Let yourself imagine what your life might be like if you left the art world behind. Just let that thought sit comfortably in your mind for a moment, without judging it. If you start to feel overwhelmed, take a quick centering moment to connect with a deeper sense of yourself. Now imagine what kind of role art might play in your life if it were free of any sense of pressure or criticism. What would that look like for you? Would it be better or worse or just different? How might you reconsider the urgency to be productive and relevant? How might you strive against rather than toward busyness? Imagine how pleasure or even joy might re-enter your practice. Perhaps you thrive on competition, or maybe you used to. What happened? Try to envision yourself embracing the challenges of the art world as a welcome and exciting thing, a chance to channel that competitiveness into a motivating force, to see it as a source of energy instead of a looming threat. Picture your life as a triumph of determination and effort over fear and self-doubt. Or not. Maybe you just want to walk away, and that's okay too. Another aspect I wanted to highlight was that Optica, which is an artist-run center, had just been renovated and it now looks just like the commercial galleries in the images on the wall. So I wanted to create a kind of mise en abîme between the space you're standing in and the ones in the images so that people could see how the modern aesthetic of the white cube as this kind of sterile, fluorescent lit space has trickled down to the artist-run center, even though they pretty much operate on opposite ends of the art world spectrum. Um, so this is part of the series State of Mind. It's called Please Come. If you haven't seen the show at the Richmond Art Gallery, this piece is currently installed outside, and it acts as both an advertisement for the show and a kind of ode to the gallery worker and the kind of activities and outreach they do to bring people in. And also, it importantly, it acknowledges how galleries often work very hard to offer something for everyone, even though that requires lots of trained staff and healthy operating budgets, both of which are often strained to the max. So I wanted the cadence of the text to reflect this kind of breathless, almost stream of conscious blurting out to passersby or some imagined friend that the artist has run into, and this could be a conversation that they're having. And the no, it's a group show is kind of an inside joke because often when you tell another artist, hey, I have a show, the next question is always, oh, is it a solo? So I wanted to just introduce the idea of how that distinction often seems to come up. And finally, this is State of Mind, Grumpy Thoughts About Art, which is currently on view at the gallery. So when Zoe invited me to be in the show and said that she was interested in this series, I agreed, but I said that I wanted to revisit and expand on it because in its original incarnation, the posters were just in black and white and in a single font. And I felt like I needed to push things a lot more. Plus, quite a bit of time had elapsed between 2012 when I started the series and where I am now. And I felt that the work needed to reflect that. So we talked about how it might act as a kind of archive or a timeline of the past 14 years so that it would encompass the idea of fluctuation or different cycles of struggle and success. And most importantly, that it might reflect quite a significant period in my practice that occurred around 2016 when I kind of hit a wall and was really struggling with creative block. So much so that I eventually gave up my studio. So that was a really low point when I was wondering if that was it. Like, am I done? And is this worth pursuing? And at that time, career-wise or job-wise, I had completely pivoted and gone back to school to study translation because I didn't want to go back to working in a gallery or a museum. And I also had to launch my business as a freelance translator, and that took up so much time and energy that I had nothing left for my art practice. So for a period of about 7 or 8 years, I really didn't make much new work at all. I still had shows here and there, but not at the same level at all. And that was very hard. Um, Another important inspiration for the series was the practice of using posters as a form of cultural advertisement for things like plays or films or concerts, which you see a lot of in large urban centers. And I've always been fascinated with how these posters distill months and sometimes even years of creative effort, often by dozens and dozens of people into a single image or caption, and how these posters silently compete for your attention as you walk by. So I was thinking about everything that happens mentally and emotionally before you get to that culmination point. And the choice of fonts is also significant. So there's Franklin Gothic, which is when, for instance, it says fine, anyone can be an artist. And that's the font used by the Museum of Modern Art. That's kind of their house font. There's Cooper, which is the poster that says brooding. And I chose it for its nostalgic aspect. It harkens back to the 1970s and my own kind of formative experiences. So for me, it reflects my unconscious or my interior dialogues. And the third font is Budmo, which is the, you see chin up, cheer up, hip hip hooray. Um, and that mimics, light bulbs or like a marquee sign. And Zoe said it reminded her of jazz hands. So this was used for things that are said out loud or things that were said to me by others or things that express a sense of expectation. So I'm going to wrap things up here for this portion of the talk. You may have noticed that most of the work I've shown is from over 10 years ago. And that's a reflection of what I mentioned a minute ago about going through this fallow period and having to put my practice on hold, partly because of creative block, but also because of other circumstances in my life that just completely took over. And now that I feel that I've come out from under that, um, it's given me some perspective on what it means to have an art practice over time and how the things I thought were important or the things that were important to me uh, earlier on have started to shift a bit, especially since moving to Winnipeg, because there aren't the same opportunities here as there are in Montreal or other large cities. But there are other things here that make up for it in ways that have actually been really valuable to me at this point in my life as I reintegrate a community that I left 30 years ago. So Winnipeg has a sizable and vibrant art scene, and it's well known for it. It has a very supportive art community, relatively cheap studio rent, and I would say, for the most part, a lack of pressure. Um, you kind of feel like no one's watching, even though maybe they are, but um, so just more time and space to just make work and think, and that's exactly what I needed to start over again. So that's the end of my presentation. So maybe we can turn it over to the Q&A.
Well, that was great. Yeah, and as Zoe had made a comment, I love how each font represents a different type of feeling or a different comment from other people. It's great. So for everyone, yes, please throw in any questions you might have in the Q&A. Um, but I mean, I can kick it off with a few. Um, just looking back at the work you were doing in sort of commenting on the structure of galleries and status and all that, did you get any blowback or
Hmm.
complaints or anything at that for that body of work?
The list of job titles.
Yeah, and just that sort of that era of work that you had done. Yeah.
I didn't get any blowback. I did get some comments about how off my list was, my sort of
Hmm.
forced hierarchy. In some cases, yeah, I reread it now and I go, oh yeah, that should be way down there. But no, as far as the survey for cultural workers goes, there were people who I was people I knew who I was hoping would participate and they didn't because they felt like even though their names wouldn't be mentioned, just having their title and city was enough of an identifier, and they felt like it was too too risky. It was not a forum for them to complain about their job. Yeah, but no, I didn't really get any blowback or complaints for other things. No.
Right. Well, that's good because I think depending on what environment you're in, I could see that might be a problem. Or even just, as you're submitting your work to different spaces. But so I think that's great that you were able to do that and reveal sort of the behind the curtain type thing that goes on in arts and culture work.
Mhm.
Um, so I'll start getting to some of the questions from people. Um, Someone was asking about, because you did mention this right at the end of, how things have changed for you in terms of your values. So what are the values that are more important to you now in art making and in presentation?
Well, and I don't know if this is just due to age or due to where I am in my career or where I am, what city I'm in, but I think the things that find most important, I mean, this is kind of going to sound cliche, but um, I've really had to think about who who am I making work for? Uh, what's important to me in terms of where I want to show. And of course, you have this idea of it being this kind of ladder that you want to climb, and at a certain point, you're just kind of like, okay, I've artist run centers. I've kind of shown coast to coast. I would like to kind of move on to the next. Um, but I guess what's important to me is less, quantity and more focusing on trying to build relationships with peers and with curators who I know would really support my work and believe in it and want to that I want to work with, instead of trying to um just sort of chase this idea of success through like constant exposure.
And one of the earlier questions that popped up, um, I think, probably in connection to you stopping art for a while, someone was asking about, children who often stop doing art. I think once you hit a certain age, you just stop. Any ideas on maybe how we can sort of help younger artists to stop that judgment
Yeah,
and keep going, basically?
that's really interesting that that's sort of linked to children. I had never really thought about that, but it's really worth considering. And I think the part of it is self-consciousness. I think maybe when children or, even adults, when you, I guess the equivalent to self-consciousness would be self-doubt, when you maybe have too much time and space to think or um uh yeah, I think you know the creative process is something that happens in isolation, but you can't just keep making work in a void. At a certain point, you want others to see it, you want to share it, and you want to know that it resonates with people. Um, and when that doesn't happen easily, when you are rejected again and again from shows that you apply to or grants that you apply for, it's really easy for that doubt to come in and kind of derail you. Um, and I don't know, part of it comes down to personality, how resilient you are, how you maybe accept rejection as or and turn it into a motivating force. For me personally, I tend to look at it that way. Um,
Mhm.
and I tend to also ask for feedback. If it's like, for instance, like the case of a grant rejection or something like that, I think it's really important to find out why. Maybe sometimes it can just be a really small thing. And even like when you're applying for shows, if they take 6 artists, maybe you were number 7, it really helps to know that,
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, certainly that's why I mentioned the idea of joy in that audio narrative, because at one point I realized that like there was no joy in making in making work. And I think a lot of artists sort of feel that way. This idea of pleasure or joy, it's not about that. It's not about that. It's an intellectual pursuit or it's something else. But it's curious to think about that, how uh it doesn't need to be a struggle all the time. But yeah, that's really interesting, this idea of like when children stop making art, why do they stop making art? Everyone makes art, everyone's an artist when they're when they're kids. It's like the first
Yes.
thing you do. So yeah, that's worth thinking more about for sure. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think, yeah, again, it is a very individual thing, but it seems to be a common once they hit a certain age, just as someone who educates children, I just know it is there's a certain age where they just that insecurity just kicks in big
It's not
time.
cool. Yeah.
Um, and just in connection to, I mean, there's a lot of questions popping up, so I'll try to weave this in. But just in connection to the last comment you just made about joy, which of your works gave you the most joy? And why or why not, or even if it's the current work you're doing?
Um, Mount Rundle, the video gave me a lot of joy, even though it was about a really kind of tough experience. But the writing process to me, I find really interesting. Um, and I mean, maybe it's because I write all day, every day for my job. But it's not, they're not my words specifically, they're translation, but more and more text and writing and voice like narrative voiceovers, it's taking up more and more space. I've always worked with text,
Mhm.
um, but it's kind of, it's taken up a lot of space, and I do enjoy that a lot. And the state of mind too was fun. But yeah, I think I'd have to say Mount Rundle was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Great. Just playing off your mention of text was a question about because the voice and text does have a very strong presence in your art practice. So maybe if you can further ex discuss its role for you, kind of how it's been interwoven in
Mhm.
some way, even from the very beginning of your earlier works to now.
Sure. Um, well, I work a lot with kind of like not found objects, but I'm not a painter. I don't, my hand is never in the work. I like taking things that are already out there and putting them together or mimicking things. And text has, in the very beginning, when I was still a student, undergrad even, working with text, I was working with cliche expressions, idioms, things like that. So existing text and juxtaposing them or, things like that. And it kind of grew out of that. Um, and it allows for me to use humor too, which is another kind of current in my work. And I mean, humor is it can be kind of a defense mechanism. It deflates tension. It hides vulnerability while showing it at the same time, you know? So I like that kind of the kind of slipperiness, but it also completely exposes you and it completely locks you in. Like you might say something and for you it has these kind of connotations, but it may not be the case for other people. It's just words, people interpret it differently. So it can kind of be a trap. It's a challenge, and I often want to get away from working with text, but I somehow always kind of go back to it.
Great. Um, oh, I lost the question. Sorry, I will go back to it. I'll just start at the beginning. Um, one of an earlier question too that popped up was, do you think that galleries, particularly curators, control what is being made in Canada now? And if an artist doesn't fit in, do they have a career?
I don't know if curators do. I think that a lot of it has to do, well, I don't know. Um, I think art schools have a lot to do with it. Um, I think that certainly some schools have a kind of stamp. You can kind of tell where someone has, you know, done their MFA by the kind of work they do. And
Right.
it kind of comes in waves and I'm not sure why that happens. I I don't know. I guess maybe it was the case 30 years ago when oh God, 30 years ago when I was in grad school. But I think certainly what happened, yeah, maybe. I mean, what happens is that there used to be a much sharper divide, I think, between artists who showed in non-commercial venues and then the commercial world. And there were few that kind of did both. You showed in a museum or you showed in a commercial gallery. You had a commercial practice or you had a museum practice. And that line is really blurred now. And so I think maybe, you know, young artists are much, much more aware of and desirous of that kind of career. And who can blame them? I mean, it's a way to make a living if you're lucky. That's a whole other conversation. But um,
Mhm.
it's a kind of it's more of a kind of career path that you can kind of envision, I think, as opposed to just like, well, I guess I'll get some museum shows, gallery shows. Um, yeah,
I hadn't thought about it that way, but looking back, it's so true about that divide between commercial and museum.
it used to be not taboo, but I mean, it was, if you're a painter or photographer, that your work lends itself much more easily to having commercial representation. It's less the case now, um, but it's certainly people kind of, a lot of young artists are really eager to enter that space. Um, and it's great. It's not, I'm not kind of dissing it. It's just uh, that it wasn't so present before, but Canada has a more robust commercial art scene now. Um, yeah, it's true curators are responsible, for what gets attention in museums, and if so yeah, I don't know. It's a tricky question, but I think it goes back farther than that, and I would maybe point to art schools.
Mhm. Yes, I mean, so much as an art student is the connections you make at that time.
Mhm.
And I mean, I tend to see people that graduated together kind of stick together in like throughout time in terms of where they get shows and just because they introduce each other to curators and
Yeah.
different spaces, or they create their own spaces. So it's a bit of both, I think, curators as well as the community you make.
Yeah.
Um, but touching up on what you were saying about emerging artists, because someone who said thank you so much for this presentation, was wondering if you have any advice for emerging artists, or even to your younger self, if you had any advice.
Mhm. Well, I think what I find is absolutely crucial is that you find a group of people, a group of fellow artists that you really connect with and that who support each other. Again, because working in a studio, it's a very isolating thing, and you need feedback. You need like-minded people around you to help each other out. And if you can't get shows, then rent a space and put a show on yourself. I think that it's really important to not let um, external circumstances decide, whether you show your work or not. Yeah,
Yeah, that's great. I hear that advice a lot. I know it's hard to follow as a young emerging artist, but it's so true. And it's what will carry you through the decades of making art is that community that you build yourself.
absolutely. And it can last forever. I
Hmm.
have friends I made in grad school and friends I made in undergrad that I'm still in touch with who are like really important in my life, not just for professional reasons, but for emotional reasons too, they're good, they're really good friends. So yeah, it's really important.
Mhm. Um, a question that is popular because a few people are wondering, is there any difference for you in terms of maintaining your art practice now as a translator compared to when you were working in the gallery sector?
When I was working in galleries, I and showing producing and showing more, um it, I was often very, very frustrated because I was either working full time. Usually I would try to negotiate working 4 days a week. So I would have at least one day in the week to be a studio day. When I was at the Leonard and Bina Ellen Gallery, I remember feeling like kind of I had this kind of growing resentment because the people we were showing on occasionally it was like I was facilitating the my peers' career. My peers would get a show or would be showing, and you know, um, I'd be sort of facilitating that, and I felt like I kind of needed to take some of that time back. So typically what I would do is I would work full time or 4 days a week for a couple, 3 years. Then I would take a leave. I would get a grant or I would get a residency and I would just take a leave, like 6 months, 3 months, whatever, and then work, 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 work. Because I'm not the kind of artist who can easily just sort of pick away at stuff a day or two a week. Like it's a formula that actually doesn't really work for me.
Mhm.
It took a long time to figure that out, but I'm more of all in or all off. I just need like a really long runway.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it tended to be a very on-off cycle. Um, and now it's kind ironically now I'm pretty much working full time, but um, I what I've started doing now is basically just spending the weekend at the studio and just kind of really drawing that line and maybe sometimes one day a week. But the work is very unpredictable. So either I'm slammed or I have nothing. So there could be a week or two where I have no work coming in. So then that's studio time. That's a bonus. So in
Right.
a way, that's changed a little bit. Um, it's maybe a bit more unpredictable, but I'm also showing less, and so there's just more breathing space.
Mhm. Great. And a question again, referencing the work you made while you were still working in the galleries. So if artists keep the outreach, as in the gallery staff and all that in mind while making art, do you think that impacts the quality or the commitment they might have towards a certain piece?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I mean, I guess if you're only thinking about how the audience is going to react to it, does that impact the work, basically, the artwork that you're making?
Right. Yeah, I tend not to I tend not to think too much about I shouldn't say I don't think about the audience. I think about like, you know, people I know or peers or something seeing the work. I mean, I feel like I'm often addressing peers when I silently, privately, when I make the work rather than a broader audience. And so the idea of yes, because it's true that like the internal dynamics piece and stuff is very much addressed to artists and cultural workers. And I did wonder, is this going to resonate with a broader public? But um, I didn't dwell too much on it. I just thought these are kind of universal struggles anyway, this idea of
Mhm.
not being happy in your job or feeling frustrated and stuck. So it it I just sort of thought of it that way. Yeah.
Mhm. Great. Not a question, but a comment of someone who was at the gallery today. Um, the installation outside they said was wonderful, and the color selection and font did hold me back. So wonderful work. And yes, I will agree, having to come to work to see it every day, it's been great. It is very striking. Um, Not just like the color of the text, but just the ideas behind the text. So yeah, it makes me want to see like you writing a book or when your book comes out kind of thing, because I can see that in you and definitely see that happening.
Well, I translate artist bios and statements and essays and catalogs all day, every day. And so there's certainly something there in terms of that part of the art world, how artists present themselves, how artists kind of self-mythologize too through their own bios,
Right.
I
Yeah.
find that kind of thing really interesting, and I have thought about um I haven't thought about it being a book or anything, but I have thought about using that as an idea for a work, like these kind of conventions around like presenting yourself, presenting your career in a little paragraph. How do you talk about your work? Um, yeah, there's a lot of material there.
Do you find there is a difference depending on like where you are, like whether you're in Montreal or Manitoba, or just in terms of the way artists do that, or do you think it's kind of a general way of writing?
I think it's kind of a general way of writing. I can certainly tell when someone has just come out of grad school by the way they by the way they write. I think that's
Yeah,
something that you kind of have to maybe unlearn a little bit and find your own voice again. Yeah, you can really tell. There's a sort
right.
of self-consciousness about using you know the kind of terminology they use and but we've been there.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
no, I wouldn't say that there are I haven't really noticed um it's pretty universal, even
right.
from French from France. I mean, I translate French to English, but
Hmm.
yeah, I can't say I've noticed like really differences that way.
Right. Okay. And someone was asking, how has it been for you working with Richmond Art Gallery after taking a break from showing
It
your
was
work?
fantastic.
Well, of course you have to say that, but no, you can be honest.
No, it was really good. It was really, really great. Yeah. It was, I have to say it was kind of I really thank Zoe for inviting me to be in this show. It was exactly the shot in the arm that I needed, and the timing was perfect, and it forced me to um look at this series that I thought was maybe kind of done, or I was just sort of poking at it every once in a while. I have shown it before in a totally different format. And I was really, really grateful for the opportunity to spend more time with it and see what I could do with it. And I already, would like to keep doing it and expanding it and changing it a bit. And so I mean, it's often that way when as soon as you finish a piece, how you would redo it,
Right, right,
Um, so I'm kind of at that point now.
right. But falling back into it, was it familiar or
It was hard.
yeah,
It was hard. I felt very, very rusty and uh yeah, a lot of very like slow baby steps and a lot of scrap and to get it to where I felt like, okay, this is okay. This I can show this. It was a long, well, months and months and months for sure. Uh,
Mhm.
but it was good to talk to Zoe about it through the process and to have her to understand how she understood it or what appealed to her in its original incarnation, not even this version, but um so yeah, it's just really helpful to have that outside perspective. And that's why I emphasize this idea of surrounding yourself with people you trust and people you can call into the studio and say, hey, I'm stuck on something, or can you have a look at this? And that's always like a shot in the arm.
Mm, for sure. Um, and Zoe was saying, lucky us, because thank you for expanding this series. You really built up on that idea. So yes, we are very lucky to have it in the gallery right now. Um, so as we hit 8 o'clock, I think it's a good time to close on that happy note of also inviting all of you out there who haven't seen the show yet. Please come do. You have until July 5th to see the show in person. Um, and yeah, like I'm so grateful, Joanne, to have you. That was, great. Oh, and Zoe just popped in that too. You can buy copies of the posters, Joanne's posters at Richmond Art Gallery. So if any of those looked interesting to you, definitely pop by and you can get a poster. So I wanted to again thank you so much, Joanne, for joining online. For those of you, hopefully I will see you again maybe next month. We are hosting the next artist salon, actually kind of in response to Joanne. I've invited the artistic director, Shannon Powell of this gallery, who was an artist who basically opened up her own gallery. Um, Locally, and it's fairly new, so I thought it'd be really nice to have an insight from someone who's like right in the thick of it right now. So join us next month for that. That'll be on Saturday, June 27th in person. Otherwise, again, hopefully we'll see you again online soon. And thank you so much, Joanne, for tonight, and thank you to everybody out there for joining us tonight. So thank you and have a good night, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.